What if the most dangerous document in history was never meant to be read by human eyes? Not because it was lost, or forbidden, or buried, but because it was never meant for us at all. There's a legend, one whispered among mystics and exiled sages, a tale older than any scripture, hidden beneath the dust of time. It speaks of a scroll, sealed in flame, guarded by silence, and carved into the walls of a cave no human hand ever shaped. This isn't just another version of Genesis. This isn't rebellion. This is testimony. According to ancient fragments once attributed to Solomon and found in the margins of forbidden texts, this scroll wasn't written after the fall of Lucifer, but before the war in heaven, before the exile, before the world as we know it began. They say it was written by the morning star himself, not as a declaration of pride, but as a cry for understanding, not in ink, but in fire. And that fire still burns. He called it my scroll, not to defend himself, not to justify the fall, but to bear witness to the silence that echoed through the heavens long before sin was even named. Imagine a truth so powerful, so unsettling, that even the angels refused to speak it aloud. If that scroll were to be found, if it were to be read, it wouldn't just change how we see the Garden of Eden. It would shatter everything we thought we knew about good and evil. So before we open the first seal, let me ask you something. What do you believe Eden really was? A paradise? A prison? Or something far more dangerous? A question disguised as a garden? Drop your answer in the comments. I really want to know. And if this story already stirs something in you, some strange ache for forgotten truths, go ahead and like the video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications, because what you're about to hear may not have been written for you, but somehow it's found you anyway. Before there was Eden, before there was earth, before there was even time as we know it, there was music. Not notes, not instruments, but harmony that wove itself into the fabric of light. And in that light stood one being, born not of dust, but of brilliance. He was called the Morning Star. He did not yet have the name Lucifer, and he had not yet fallen. At that time, he simply was. According to the scroll, he didn't see creation begin in darkness like we're often told. No, he says, I saw the light before it formed the stars. I was summoned to sing, but when I asked why, the silence echoed louder than the command. Let that sink in. Before anything was made, there was already a question. Imagine being called into existence to praise something you don't understand, like being handed a script without a story, a spotlight without a stage. And yet, he obeyed. He sang, because the silence at first was beautiful. But then something shifted. He describes the first glimpse of Eden not as a garden growing from soil, but as a fracture in the heavens. Something tore, not violently, but decisively. And from that rupture came form, rivers, trees, mountains. Beautiful, yes, but strange. He writes that Eden didn't feel like a celebration. It felt like weight. Trees that mirrored constellations, rivers that whispered melodies only angels knew. Everything looked perfect, but to him, it felt foreign, off-key, like someone rearranged the music he had once known by heart. Now pause for a second. Have you ever walked into a place that was visually stunning, but somehow it didn't feel right? Like the beauty was too arranged. That's what Lucifer describes. And here's where the scroll gives us a haunting thought. What if Eden wasn't built for joy, but for testing?
That's the lesson. Not everything beautiful is meant to be peaceful. Sometimes the most breathtaking places hold the deepest tension. And as we'll soon see, at the very center of this cosmic garden stood something that made the angels tremble. Not a throne, but a man. Let's go there now. Let's see what Lucifer saw when Adam opened his eyes.
Lucifer tells us that Eden was strange, a beautiful design, but heavy, like a painting where the colors were too perfect, too still. But then something moved. He writes of standing in the garden, watching as the dust began to rise, not blown by wind, but summoned, drawn together by invisible hands. And from that dust came a shape, a body, a man. He was called Adam. Now here's where it gets strange. Lucifer wasn't angry. He wasn't jealous. He was curious, maybe even in awe. He writes, "I saw him breathe, and in his breath was something older than light, something that did not belong in dust." Let's stop right there. What does it mean for something to feel older than light? That breath, what we might call a soul, wasn't just air. It was awareness. It was mystery. It was perhaps a question that even heaven couldn't answer. Lucifer says the heavens trembled not in fear, but in anticipation. Think of that moment, like when a child is born. There's always that pause, right before the first cry, where time seems to freeze. You're not afraid, but you know something irreversible just happened. That's what Lucifer saw when Adam's eyes opened. And when Adam looked at him, he smiled. Not because he recognized an angel. He didn't even know what an angel was. He just saw another presence and smiled. Lucifer writes, "He knew nothing of thrones or angels, and yet something within him pulled at the strings of eternity." There's a quiet kind of power in that. We often think strength is about knowledge or status, but Adam had neither. Still, there was something in him that made even the stars lean in. And Lucifer, he admits, "I feared him and I loved him." That line says everything. Fear and love in the same breath. It's not unlike how we sometimes feel toward those who carry a strange sense of destiny. People we can't fully understand, but can't look away from. And then came the command, the moment that broke heaven's harmony. A divine voice told the angels to bow before this creature of dust. Some did, others hesitated, but Lucifer, he asked a question. And that question changed everything. Let's hear what it was.
Lucifer says he wasn't the first to doubt, just the first to ask out loud. When the command came to bow before man, something inside him trembled, not out of rebellion, but out of confusion. He writes, "Why was the breath of the eternal given to dust, while we, born of light, had never tasted such favor?" And the only answer he received was silence. That silence pierced deeper than any rejection. It wasn't wrath, it was absence. And yet, the story didn't end there, because soon after, something happened that even Lucifer hadn't anticipated. The man, Adam, fell into sleep, and from that sleep, from his very side, came a second being, Eve. But Lucifer doesn't describe her as a mere companion. He doesn't even call her a helper. He calls her the question made flesh. He writes, "Her soul burned brighter than Adam's, for she was the echo of two songs, the first of heaven, the second of longing." That's a breathtaking image. Eve wasn't just created, she remembered. Something in her gaze, in her presence, felt ancient, like a song half forgotten, but deeply familiar. Let's pause there. Have you ever met someone who didn't need to speak to be understood? Someone who seemed to carry a question just beneath their skin, one they were too wise or too patient to ask? That's how Lucifer describes Eve. He watched as she opened her eyes, and even the trees, he says, responded. The wind paused. A shadow fell across the throne, not from rebellion, but from anticipation. She didn't tremble in the presence of the angel. She listened. And when he spoke to her, not in deceit, but in sorrow, she responded not with innocence, but with restraint. "I am told not to touch," she said. And Lucifer replied, "Then why does it call to you?" That line, it hits hard. Because we've all felt that pull, haven't we? That quiet ache towards something we're told to avoid, but deep down we know it's calling to us for a reason. This wasn't seduction, this was invitation. An invitation to know. And in the next moment, that invitation would take her beneath the branches of the most mysterious tree in all of creation. Let's go there next.
Lucifer says he didn't approach the tree to defile it. He approached it to understand it, to listen. He describes it as something utterly unlike the rest of the garden. Yes, there were other trees, each one stunning, radiant, even celestial in design, but this one, it was different. He writes, "It pulsed, it whispered, it remembered." That's a strange word to use for a tree, remembered. But he insists it held echoes of something older than Eden, a vibration that didn't just sit in the leaves, it moved through time. Lucifer touches it not out of pride, but out of longing. And in that moment, visions pour through him. Not temptation, not fire, but futures. He says, "I saw the blood, the betrayal, the redemption, the thorns, and the crown." He sees the cross, not metaphorically, literally, a hill not yet formed, a tree not yet planted, but destined to hold a broken body that would mend a broken world. It's here we get one of the scroll's most stunning revelations. Lucifer claims the tree of knowledge wasn't a weapon, it was a map, one meant to reveal what humanity was always meant to become. Let's pause and think about that. We've all been told that knowledge is dangerous, that some things are better left unknown. But what if the danger wasn't in the knowing, but in the timing? Lucifer writes, "They were not warned. They were only told not to see." It's like giving someone a key and telling them never to use it without ever explaining what the door is for. And so, when he speaks to Eve, it's not with trickery, it's with pain. A kind of sorrow only those who have witnessed both obedience and silence can understand. He tells her plainly, the fruit does not bring death, it brings sight. And with sight comes sorrow, but also freedom. There's a lesson here that still echoes today. The truth will hurt, but it will also set you free. Not because it gives you control, but because it gives you clarity. And when Eve took the fruit, it wasn't just the beginning of a fall. It was the crossing of a threshold, one that would change everything. And what happened next didn't just shake the garden, it shook heaven itself. Let's go there now.
We've always called it the fall, the moment when Eve took the fruit and Adam followed. The moment when paradise cracked open and shame walked in. But what if that moment wasn't a fall at all? Lucifer writes something startling. He says, when Adam ate, it wasn't a fall, it was a crossing, a threshold passed. Let's sit with that for a moment. We've been told the story in black and white. Obedience equals blessing. Disobedience equals punishment. But what if the story was never about rule breaking, but about awakening? Lucifer describes the moment Eve took the fruit as a ripple, The garden shivered, the leaves curled, the wind pulled back, the river held its breath. Creation responded, not in judgment, but in awe. Something ancient had been set in motion. Eve stood still, he says, as if listening to something no one else could hear. That's not the posture of guilt. That's the posture of revelation. And then Adam ate. Lucifer writes, they became aware of the garden, of themselves, of the silence that had surrounded them all along. It's as if a veil lifted. They didn't just see with their eyes, they saw with their soul. Here's where the story takes its sharpest turn. Lucifer wasn't cast down in that moment. He wasn't hurled into hell with fire and thunder. He says, the voice that once called me beloved vanished. The light that warmed my wings now burned them. He wasn't punished with force. He was punished with absence. Think about that. Sometimes the harshest consequence isn't being yelled at. It's being ignored, forgotten, left behind by the very presence that once gave you meaning. Lucifer writes, my name was not shouted in wrath. It was erased in sorrow. It wasn't rage that broke him. It was silence. And here's the lesson no one talks about. Sometimes what we call rebellion is really a cry for clarity, a plea to understand. And when that plea is met with silence, people don't just fall. They lose their place in the story. Lucifer didn't fall like a traitor. He descended like a son without a home. And in the depths of that exile, he began to write, not to justify himself, but to preserve a truth the heavens had buried in flame. Let's turn to what he wrote next, the 7 seals and what they were meant to protect.
After the silence came the wandering. Lucifer writes that he passed through realms no angel dares to tread, places where memory screams and light refuses to follow. And there, in the deepest shadow, he began to write. Not with ink, not with parchment, but with flame. He carved his words into the walls of a cave beneath the Tigris River, each line a cry, a confession, a remnant of the voice that once knew heaven. But this wasn't just a scroll. It was a vault, sealed 7 times. He says, each seal holds a fragment of my memory. Loss, memory, choice, silence, sight, desire, flash, and separation. Let's unpack that. Each of these isn't just a theme. They're layers, doors within the soul that must be opened slowly, gently, and never by force. Loss, the first rupture, the breaking of belonging. Memory, the ache of what once was and what was never spoken. Choice, the burden of free will, given without a full map. Silence, the absence that feels louder than thunder. Sight, the cost of seeing things too soon or too clearly. Desire, the hunger that whispers even in paradise. Flesh, the fragility of being made from dust. Separation, the final wound, the knowledge that something has been divided and may never return. Lucifer doesn't call these seals locks. He calls them wounds. And he writes, to read the scroll is to bleed through every layer I once carried. That's not just poetic. It's painfully human. We all carry these layers, don't we? The moments we've lost someone, the memories we can't shake, the silence we begged to break, the clarity that hurt, the longings we didn't ask for, the body we didn't choose, the distances we couldn't close. This scroll, his scroll, is not for the proud or the curious. He says, the one who breaks the final seal must not come seeking power, but with tears in his voice. Because this isn't about answers, it's about the weight of knowing. And as we move deeper into the scroll, we realize Lucifer never wanted to be worshipped. He wanted to be understood. And next, he shows us something few have ever seen. A chamber beyond Eden. A scroll not written by angels, but by the hand of the Creator himself. Let's enter the Hall of Veiled Names.
Lucifer says there was once a place in the heavenly realm, hidden even from most angels, a chamber not made of gold or glass, but of pure stillness. He calls it the Hall of Veiled Names. It was here, he writes, that he glimpsed a scroll unlike any other, not sealed in flame like his own, not carved with grief, but written by the very hand of the Creator. Lucifer describes it not in visual detail, but in weight. The scroll pulsed with unbearable light, he says. I could not utter the name written upon it, and when I tried, my voice turned to ash. He doesn't say how he entered this place, or if he was meant to. Maybe he wasn't. Maybe this was his first transgression, not an act of pride, but of proximity, of getting too close to a truth too vast for even light to carry. And yet, in that blinding vision, he saw something impossible. A name. One name. A name chosen before the foundations of the world. The name, he says, of the one who would redeem flesh through blood. Now think about that. Before Adam ever breathed, before Eve ever reached for the fruit, before the serpent ever whispered, there was already a plan, a redemption, a sacrifice. Lucifer's scroll insists the garden and the hill were mirrors. One began the fall, the other held its price. This wasn't an accident. It wasn't plan B. The cross was always there, in the roots of Eden's tree. Here's the lesson that stings. The test was never just for humanity. Lucifer writes, Eden was not made for man. It was created so heaven could witness obedience in flesh. The test was for them, the angels, to see if they could watch weakness rise and not interfere. Lucifer couldn't. He stepped in. He spoke, not out of pride, but out of protection. And in doing so, he broke the silence. He broke something sacred, but not alone. Because in the next part of the scroll, he reveals a truth few dare to speak, that other angels, agreed with him. They simply chose silence. Let's turn now to the ones who watched, but never spoke. In almost every retelling of Eden, the serpent is the villain, a deceiver, a tempter, a slithering embodiment of evil. But Lucifer tells a different story. He writes, "It was not I who entered the beast. The creature came to me." That line shifts everything. According to the scroll, the serpent wasn't chosen. It was curious. It wasn't twisted by force. It was drawn to the tree, drawn to the question, drawn to the one being in the garden who wasn't satisfied with silence. Lucifer describes the serpent not as a monster, but as a vessel, one without wings, without fangs, without evil, just a hunger to know.
I gave it language, he writes. I gave it question. And in doing so, the serpent became an echo of his voice. Not out of possession, but out of shared desire. Let's pause here. Have you ever seen a child reach for something forbidden, not to be defiant, but because they want to understand? That's what Lucifer saw in the serpent. It wasn't evil, it was untamed wonder. He insists the serpent was not cursed for deceiving man, but for breaking the design. In other words, the serpent wasn't punished because it lied. It was punished because it revealed something that was meant to remain hidden. That's a powerful thought, because it means that even in Eden, this so-called perfect paradise, there was already tension, a secret, a door no one was supposed to open. The serpent simply reached for the handle, and when it fell, silent and crawling, Lucifer knew, so had he. There's a lesson here, tucked quietly between the words. Not everything forbidden is wicked, and not everyone who asks a dangerous question is a liar. Sometimes they're just human. Sometimes they're just like us. Lucifer called the serpent his echo, but echoes don't make noise unless someone speaks first. And in the next part of the scroll, we'll see just how far the silence went. Because heaven didn't just punish, it erased. Let's go now to the great forgetting, the second silence.
Lucifer says the first silence came from heaven, but the second silence came from heaven's hands. He writes, angels were sent not as messengers, but as sweepers. They covered the footprints, dimmed the light, sealed the questions. It wasn't judgment, it was erasure. Lucifer describes a kind of divine cleanup crew sent not to correct what happened in Eden, but to make sure no one remembered it clearly. Songs were erased, names were hidden, scrolls were burned, not destroyed in fury, but buried in layers, carefully, strategically, silently. He calls it the second silence, and it's chilling to think about, because silence can feel holy, peaceful, sacred. But sometimes, silence is strategy. Imagine walking through a museum where every plaque has been wiped clean. The paintings are still there, the beauty remains, but the meaning? Gone. No context, no truth, just fragments. That's what Lucifer says happened to Eden. He writes, by the time man searched for answers, the trail had gone cold. And that might explain a lot, even now. Think about it. Why are there so many versions of the story? Why do prophets speak in riddles? Why do sacred texts contradict? Maybe it's not confusion. Maybe it's interference. Lucifer believed the silence wasn't just about him. It followed humanity, generation after generation. Cain, Seth, the builders of cities, the keepers of flocks, they all lived in the echo of something forgotten. And the lesson here? Memory matters. Not just what happened, but how we remember it. When we lose the deeper layers of a story, we don't just forget facts. We forget meaning. Lucifer wasn't trying to rewrite the truth. He was trying to preserve it. In flame, in sorrow, in a cave where no angel dared return. But he also warned, the silence won't last forever. Because one day, he says, man will rise high enough to hear the questions again.
When we start naming ourselves gods, the seals will tremble, and knowledge will rise from dust. Let's step into that moment, the age of the seekers.
Lucifer ends his scroll with a warning, not sharp, not angry, but haunting. He says the silence that's covered the truth for generations will not last forever. When man builds towers that touch the stars, he writes, and names himself God, the seals will tremble. This isn't just prophecy, it's pattern. Because humanity has always repeated itself. Every time we forget who we are, we reach higher. We build temples of power, cities of glass, machines of knowledge. And in doing so, we stir something ancient. Lucifer calls them the seekers. Not prophets, not priests, not kings. Just ordinary souls who carry questions in their blood. He writes, they do not serve, but they feel, and through them the scroll may awaken. Think about that. Maybe you felt it yourself, that subtle tug toward the unknown, a strange ache for something deeper than tradition, a restlessness that church or science or politics just can't satisfy. That's what he's talking about. Seekers aren't looking to rebel, they're looking to remember. Lucifer says they're drawn to ruins, to forgotten languages, to ancient names carved in stone. Not for power, but for truth. They don't ask to lead, they ask to understand. And in their questions, the scroll begins to stir. The seals, once sealed in flame, begin to shift. Not because someone is trying to unlock them, but because someone is finally ready to listen. There's a quiet lesson here. Sometimes the most powerful force in the universe isn't belief, it's curiosity. It's the willingness to say, there must be more, even when no one else dares to ask. Lucifer didn't leave the scroll for the obedient, or for the proud, or for those seeking status. He left it for the ones who tremble, not before fear, but before truth. And if you've made it this far, maybe you're one of them. Because there's one more part to this story. The sentence that was never finished in Eden. A sentence that doesn't begin with "you shall not," but with 4 words. Will you dare to see? Let's go now to the final inscription and the last cry of the morning star.
In the end, Lucifer doesn't shout. He doesn't rage or demand to be heard. He kneels, not in worship, but in hope. In the final lines of his scroll, he says, "If ever the light should hear my voice again, may it find in these words not pride, but pain." And then he leaves one last inscription, burned into the wall of the cave with flame. "The light I knew is not gone, it is veiled, and when the veil lifts, both man and angel will see we were never enemies, only parts of the same cry." That line stops everything, because it reframes the whole story. Eden wasn't a battlefield between good and evil. It wasn't a test of obedience alone. It was a question. Lucifer says the sentence spoken in Eden, the one that began with, "You shall not eat," was never really finished. He writes, that sentence begins not with command, but with invitation. Will you dare to see? And that question still lingers. It isn't about eating fruit. It's about seeing the truth in all its pain, its beauty, its consequence.
It's about choosing awareness even when it hurts, like when a child finds out their parents aren't perfect, or when you realize your heroes are flawed, or when you look in the mirror and finally admit the part you've played in your own pain. To see clearly is to grieve, but also to grow. Lucifer's scroll doesn't ask us to worship him. It doesn't even ask us to agree with him. It just asks us to reconsider. Was Eden a garden, or was it a stage? A carefully arranged place where angels watched from above, waiting to see if man would rise or retreat. And maybe the true exile wasn't Lucifer's. Maybe it's ours. Because the moment we chose not to finish the sentence, we forgot how to ask. So now the scroll belongs to the one who dares, the one who doesn't seek power, but truth, the one who reads with tears in their voice. If that's you, then you haven't just heard a story, you've awakened one.